So the story of Unload really starts with what actually is happening to the guys in Afghanistan and Iraq when they come back. So we're going back now to say 2005, 2010. So what actually is happening to those guys? Are they getting the same help that I got, which isn't available through the NHS? It isn't available through NICE guidelines. It's a different way of being supported. So that's my curiosity. How's the tribe being supported? And I was walking down a green leafy lane one day, and a thought popped in my head about how does creativity, how does art, how does working in different ways support those post-armed conflict? And it's all of those post-armed conflict. So that's kind of where Unload started, just a question. And a couple of years down the road, really came to the conclusion that actually that doesn't seem to be happening, but let's really get this idea up and running. Let's really make this a proper thing. And some core principles where it came at the beginning. Firstly, it's going to be a social enterprise, because this is about fair means of exchange. It isn't just about a charity. It's about providing support, yeah, but actually there's going to be something back, because if you've patrolled, if you've served, there's a pride in that, and there's also huge amount of experience. So it isn't a question of being done to, it's a question of you might need help at some point, but what are you going to do in return? Because all the work can never be done by you anyway. That'll go against the ethos of how supported me. So that's the first thought. It's going to be a social enterprise, not a charity. There's going to be no passengers, but this is going to be applied with love. And the next thing was going to actually apply the core principles. And we talk about trauma, we don't talk about PTSD. Because there's so many different things you can talk about. You can talk about in the past. What's called PTSD now is called combat stress, battle fatigue. If you go back a couple of centuries, it was called soldier's heart. In the Spanish Civil War, it's called to be broken. Go back to the 17th century, it's called nostalgia. Every war has this. The Greeks were talking about this and had a process at the end of it of actually decompressing, you could say. That classic idea of sitting around a campfire and working through what happened that day, because it affects the soul and the heart. It doesn't impact on your mental health. That's a separate area. That's external to you. This really fucking matters if you've done that, and the impact on you. So that's kind of where it started off. So then I did about action research, of really looking to see what others are doing. And push comes to shove. What actually happens is there's an awful lot of support around welfare support, and welfare support is support for things like housing, job, transferring out of the armed forces. An awful lot of stuff around that kind of area. And of course there's the mental health support through the NHS, through the combat stress and other providers. But who supports the families? Who supports the partners of the guy who's experienced trauma? What about trauma on a broader level? It isn't just the military. So how do you then kind of move forward? There's about 3,500 agencies supporting the military already. So is it really sensible to start another organisation? Well, the answer is that I haven't found another agency which applies the same methodology and principles we apply. I haven't found another agency which is non-hierarchical. So in other words, our approach is ground up. We use a co-production approach, which means that those who initially received help are involved in the active planning of every element of the organisation. What works for them on a therapeutic level, but also how to organise ourselves, what works for them, what kind of things do we want to do? You know, the stuff which is deep, the stuff which isn't so deep. How do we actually organise all that stuff? And there wasn't, so we created Unload. And where we are today, in mid-2016, is that we were constituted, so had a legal entity in the end of 2013. 2014 was actually getting things together, because we are talking about moving into the area which people normally associate with mental health. So we need to be resilient, we need to be clear, we need to be balanced individually and organisationally. And of course, you need a couple of quid to actually start things going. So 2014 was very much about getting those foundations in place, getting a board in place, getting a board who understood the ethos of Unload, who understood the problem. And they all came from the tribe. 2015 with a tiny amount of money, and by that I mean we had some money from Awards for All to run a series of residential workshops. And our hope was that we could talk to all the other agencies, there are 3,500 of them, and say, look, give us 12 good men, and we can run a workshop for you. Well, the reality is that got nowhere very quickly. So the way we actually found, in marketing terms, a route to market is through word of mouth. So we just started with whoever we were. One guy spoke to another guy, partner, and we started the first residential workshop. And one of the core phrases at the end of that workshop was a wife saying, "It's like I got my man back." So I think we seem to be on the right track. And we had a series of those all over 2015. So we then had the evidence, and that evidence caught the attention of specialist agencies in the NHS in particular. Because they recognise that actually there's gaps in the market. They realise there's gaps in support available. And they realise we're not a competitor, we're not trying to take someone else's money, we're just trying to provide a service in what we perceive is a huge gap in emotional intelligence around engagement of people traumatised where they're at, of a process and a system whereby from the initial point of contact through into some form of process or therapeutic environment, and then to hold and build that on, because it isn't a question of just going away for a few weeks on a course. It's a question of this will take time, and to regather your body and soul together, to regather and mend a fractured soul, to mend a broken heart, isn't something which takes weeks. It's something which takes a period of time. And the human frame needs time to process each stage along the way. That's actually recognised by veteran support agencies, by trauma centres, by those within the NHS who kind of are hitting the problem. They're hitting the problem of actually veterans not turning up for counselling or whatever sport it might be. Understanding that actually CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, which is the core therapy, actually only works for about 30% of folk, statistically. There's other stuff available. And of course, one of the challenges is that to access any of the supports, you need to be clear of booze, you need to be clear of drugs, which are the main coping mechanisms for people who can't sleep, who haven't slept for 30 years, whose only means of sleeping is to drink until the units of alcohol are sufficient for them to be unconscious, but therefore you're going to wake. But they wear off, you wake. A unit per 30 minutes, so you then wake up again and you haven't actually slept properly. All the time you've lost your job, maybe you've lost your family and your partners, or maybe you've nearly killed them by mist hits one day. So all of that's kind of going on.